Question 1. Stakeholder feedback indicates that some real estate agents in Manitoba are not adequately explaining the implications of private mortgage insurance, PMI, to prospective buyers. If a buyer in Manitoba is seeking to purchase a property with a down payment of less than 20% and the lender requires private mortgage insurance, what is the most professional and compliant course of action for the real estate agent? Option A. Suggest that the buyer increase their down payment to avoid PMI, without first fully explaining the current PMI requirements and costs. Option B. Clearly and comprehensively explain the nature of private mortgage insurance, including its costs, purpose, and implications for the buyer's overall financing, ensuring the buyer fully understands it is a mandatory component of the mortgage. Option C. Focus on the benefit of securing financing with a smaller down payment, without detailing the specific costs or the fact that the insurance primarily protects the lender. Option D. Advise the buyer that PMI is a minor administrative fee and will not significantly affect their monthly mortgage payments. The correct answer is B. Clearly and comprehensively explain the nature of private mortgage insurance, including its costs, purpose, and implications for the buyer's overall financing, ensuring the buyer fully understands it is a mandatory component of the mortgage. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate agent in Manitoba to navigate the complexities of private mortgage insurance, PMI, in a way that is both compliant with provincial regulations and ethically sound for the client. The agent must balance the client's desire for a specific property with the lender's requirements and the implications of PMI, ensuring the client fully understands the financial commitment and risks involved. Misrepresenting or downplaying the role and cost of PMI can lead to significant financial distress for the buyer and potential legal repercussions for the agent. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly and comprehensively explaining the nature of private mortgage insurance to the buyer. This includes detailing what PMI is, why it is required by the lender, typically when the down payment is less than 20% of the purchase price, the specific costs associated with it, both upfront and ongoing premiums, and how it protects the lender, not the borrower. The agent must ensure the buyer understands that PMI is a mandatory component of the mortgage financing in this situation, and that its cost will be factored into their overall housing expenses. This approach aligns with the ethical duty of a Manitoba real estate agent to act in the best interests of their client, providing full disclosure and facilitating informed decision-making, as mandated by the Real Estate Services Act and its associated regulations, which emphasize honesty, integrity, and client protection. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to downplay the significance of PMI, suggesting it is a minor administrative fee that will not substantially impact the buyer's monthly payments. This is professionally unacceptable because it misrepresents a material cost of the transaction, potentially leading the buyer to underestimate their financial obligations. This failure to disclose material facts violates the agent's duty of honesty and integrity under Manitoba's real estate legislation. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the fact that PMI allows the buyer to secure financing with a smaller down payment, without adequately explaining the associated costs and the fact that the insurance benefits the lender. This selective disclosure omits crucial information about the financial burden of PMI, which is a direct cost to the buyer. It fails to meet the standard of providing full and accurate information required by the Real Estate Services Act. A third incorrect approach is to advise the buyer that they can simply avoid PMI by increasing their down payment, without exploring the feasibility or implications of such an increase for the buyer's financial situation. While suggesting alternatives is part of good service, doing so without a thorough understanding of the buyer's financial capacity, or without fully explaining the impact of PMI if they proceed with the original down payment, is a failure to provide comprehensive guidance. The agent's role is to inform and facilitate, not to make financial decisions for the client or to present options without full context. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric decision-making framework. This involves prioritizing clear, transparent, and complete communication. When dealing with complex financial instruments like PMI, the agent must first identify the client's understanding and then proactively provide all necessary information, including costs, benefits to whom, and regulatory requirements. The agent should then facilitate the client's understanding and decision-making by answering questions and ensuring they are comfortable with the financial implications. This process ensures compliance with regulatory obligations and upholds the highest ethical standards. Question 2. Governance review demonstrates that a seller in Manitoba wishes to list their property for sale with the objective of achieving maximum market exposure and securing the highest possible sale price. They are open to working with a real estate brokerage, but are concerned about the potential for a lengthy selling process. Considering these objectives, which approach best aligns with professional standards and regulatory expectations for listing agreements in Manitoba? Option A. Suggest an open listing agreement, highlighting the possibility of multiple brokerages marketing the property, but omitting the potential for fragmented marketing efforts and minimal brokerage investment. Option B. Propose an exclusive agency listing agreement, emphasizing that the seller would not owe commission if they personally find and secure a buyer, but without fully detailing the reduced marketing incentive for the brokerage. Option C. Present all listing agreement options equally without a recommendation, allowing the seller to choose based solely on their own interpretation of the terms. Option D. Recommend an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, clearly explaining how it incentivizes the brokerage to invest in comprehensive marketing strategies to achieve broad exposure and a favorable sale price, while also clarifying the commission structure. The correct answer is D. Recommend an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, clearly explaining how it incentivizes the brokerage to invest in comprehensive marketing strategies to achieve broad exposure and a favorable sale price, while also clarifying the commission structure. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the real estate agent to balance the seller's desire for maximum exposure and potential for a higher sale price with the agent's fiduciary duty to act in the seller's best interest and adhere to the terms of the listing agreement. Misinterpreting the type of listing agreement or failing to disclose the implications of different listing types can lead to disputes, potential legal action, and damage to the agent's reputation and the brokerage standing within Manitoba. Careful judgment is required to ensure the seller fully understands their obligations and the agent's rights and responsibilities under the chosen agreement. Correct approach analysis. The approach that represents best professional practice involves clearly explaining to the seller the fundamental differences between an exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, and open listing agreement, and then recommending the exclusive right to sell agreement as the most suitable option for their stated goals. This approach is correct because an exclusive right to sell agreement, as governed by Manitoba real estate regulations and standard brokerage practices, provides the seller with the broadest marketing reach and the highest likelihood of a sale by incentivizing the listing brokerage to invest significant resources in marketing. It also ensures the seller is obligated to pay the brokerage commission regardless of who procures the buyer, which is a standard and accepted practice that aligns with the brokerage's commitment to marketing efforts. This aligns with the agent's duty to provide competent service and to act in the client's best interest by recommending the strategy most likely to achieve their objective of selling the property. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending an exclusive agency agreement without a thorough discussion of its limitations would be professionally unacceptable. This type of agreement, while allowing the seller to avoid paying commission if they find the buyer themselves, significantly reduces the incentive for the listing brokerage to invest heavily in marketing, as they risk not being compensated for their efforts. This could lead to a less effective marketing campaign and potentially a longer time on the market, which may not be in the seller's best interest. Furthermore, recommending an open listing agreement is also professionally unsound in this context. An open listing offers no exclusivity to any brokerage and typically results in minimal marketing effort from any party, as multiple agents may be involved, and only the agent who brings the successful buyer receives a commission. This approach is unlikely to achieve the seller's goal of maximum exposure and a swift sale. Finally, presenting the options without a clear recommendation or explanation of their implications, leaving the seller to choose without informed guidance, fails to meet the agent's professional obligation to advise and guide their client effectively. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first actively listening to and understanding the seller's primary objectives. Then, they must educate the seller on the available listing agreement types, detailing the implications of each regarding marketing, commission obligations, and the agent's incentives. The professional should then offer a reasoned recommendation based on the seller's stated goals and the typical market dynamics in Manitoba, ensuring the seller makes an informed decision that aligns with their best interests and the terms of the chosen agreement. Question 3. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for clearer understanding of property ownership structures in Manitoba. A client is considering purchasing a property and is confused about the distinctions between various ways title can be held. Which of the following approaches best addresses the client's need for accurate and comprehensive information regarding fee simple, leasehold, joint tenancy, and tenancy in common? Option A. Clearly differentiate between fee simple ownership, which grants indefinite rights, and leasehold interests, which are for a defined term. Furthermore, explain that joint tenancy includes a right of survivorship, while tenancy in common involves undivided fractional interests that can be willed independently. Option B. Explain that all property ownership involves owning the property outright for an extended period, and that when multiple people own property, they simply share the responsibilities. Option C. Focus on the duration of ownership, describing fee simple as long-term ownership and leasehold as short-term, and mention that joint tenancy and tenancy in common both mean sharing ownership. Option D. Emphasize that the primary difference between ownership types lies in the amount of money paid for the property, and that joint tenancy and tenancy in common are just different ways to split the mortgage payments. The correct answer is A. Clearly differentiate between fee simple ownership, which grants indefinite rights, and leasehold interests, which are for a defined term. Furthermore, explain that joint tenancy includes a right of survivorship, while tenancy in common involves undivided fractional interests that can be willed independently. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misinterpreting property ownership structures, which can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for clients. A real estate professional must accurately identify and advise on the implications of different ownership types to ensure client understanding and prevent future disputes. The risk lies in providing advice that is technically incorrect or fails to address the nuances of each ownership form, potentially exposing the client to unintended consequences or legal challenges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly distinguishing between fee simple ownership and leasehold interests, and then further differentiating between joint tenancy and tenancy in common within the context of co-ownership. Fee simple represents the most complete form of ownership, granting the owner the right to possess, use, and dispose of the property indefinitely. Leasehold, conversely, grants the right to occupy and use a property for a specified period under a lease agreement, with ownership remaining with the landlord. When multiple parties hold title, understanding the right of survivorship inherent in joint tenancy versus the undivided fractional interest of tenancy in common is crucial. This comprehensive approach ensures the client receives accurate information tailored to their specific situation, aligning with the ethical duty of competence and diligence required under Manitoba real estate regulations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to broadly categorize all forms of property ownership as simply owning the property outright, without detailing the specific rights and limitations of each. This fails to acknowledge the fundamental differences between fee simple and leasehold, potentially misleading a client into believing they have absolute ownership when they only possess a leasehold interest. It also overlooks the critical distinctions in co-ownership structures. Another incorrect approach would be to conflate joint tenancy and tenancy in common, focusing solely on the shared ownership aspect without explaining the implications of the right of survivorship in joint tenancy, which automatically passes the deceased owner's share to the surviving joint tenant. This omission is a significant failure, as it can lead to unintended inheritance outcomes and disputes among heirs, violating the duty to provide accurate and complete advice. A further incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the duration of ownership without addressing the nature of the rights held. For instance, describing fee simple as merely long-term ownership, without emphasizing its indefinite nature and the full bundle of rights associated with it, while also failing to clearly delineate the limited rights of a leaseholder, would be an incomplete and potentially misleading explanation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured approach to client education regarding property ownership. This involves first identifying the fundamental nature of the interest being held, e.g., fee simple vs. leasehold. Subsequently, if co-ownership is involved, The professional must meticulously explain the differences between joint tenancy and tenancy in common, highlighting the critical implications of the right of survivorship and the nature of individual interests. This systematic breakdown ensures clarity, accuracy, and empowers the client to make informed decisions, thereby upholding professional standards and mitigating potential liabilities. Question 4. Compliance review shows that a property listed for sale in Winnipeg, Manitoba, has a history of industrial use, and the seller has provided a preliminary environmental report from a previous sale attempt that suggests potential soil contamination. As a real estate professional representing the seller, what is the most prudent risk assessment approach to ensure compliance with Manitoba's real estate regulations and ethical standards? Option A. Proceed with marketing the property immediately, relying on the seller's assurance that there are no known environmental issues beyond what is mentioned in the report. Option B. Engage a qualified environmental consultant to conduct a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA) to thoroughly evaluate potential environmental risks and inform disclosure. Option C. Advise the seller to simply disclose the existence of the previous environmental report to potential buyers without further investigation. Option D. Dismiss the concerns raised by the previous owner's report as insignificant, assuming no visible signs of contamination are present. Correct answer is B. Engage a qualified environmental consultant to conduct a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA) to thoroughly evaluate potential environmental risks and inform disclosure. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate professional in Manitoba to navigate the intersection of environmental due diligence and client representation, balancing the client's desire for a quick sale with the legal and ethical obligations to disclose material latent defects, including potential environmental concerns. The professional must exercise sound judgment to avoid misrepresentation and ensure compliance with Manitoba's Real Estate Services Act and its associated regulations, as well as any relevant provincial environmental legislation. The best approach involves proactively engaging a qualified environmental consultant to conduct a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA). This is the correct and most responsible course of action because it directly addresses the potential environmental risks identified. A Phase I ESA is a standard industry practice for assessing potential contamination without intrusive sampling, providing a documented report on historical land use, site characteristics, and potential environmental liabilities. This approach aligns with the professional's duty of care to their client and to potential buyers by providing objective, expert information to inform decision-making and disclosure. It allows for informed negotiations and ensures that any subsequent remediation or risk management strategies are based on expert findings, thereby fulfilling disclosure obligations under Manitoba law and ethical standards. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the concerns raised by the previous owner's report as insignificant without independent verification. This fails to acknowledge the potential for material latent defects that could impact the property's value or usability, and it breaches the duty to disclose known or reasonably discoverable environmental issues. Relying solely on the seller's potentially incomplete or biased information is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to advise the client to simply disclose the existence of the previous report without providing any context or further investigation. While disclosure is important, simply mentioning a report without understanding its findings or implications is insufficient. It does not adequately inform potential buyers about the nature or extent of any environmental concerns and could still lead to misrepresentation if the report indicates significant risks that are not fully explained. This approach risks failing to meet the standard of care expected of a real estate professional in Manitoba. A further incorrect approach would be to proceed with marketing the property without any environmental assessment, assuming the absence of visible signs of contamination. Environmental contamination is often not visually apparent, and historical land use can create significant subsurface risks. This approach ignores the potential for undisclosed environmental liabilities, which can have severe legal and financial consequences for both the seller and the buyer, and it violates the professional's obligation to conduct thorough due diligence. Professionals should adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves identifying potential risks, like the environmental concerns raised, assessing their materiality, and implementing appropriate due diligence measures. In this case, the materiality of the environmental concern necessitates expert assessment. The professional's role is to facilitate informed transactions, which includes proactively identifying and addressing potential issues that could affect the property's value or create liability, in accordance with Manitoba's regulatory framework and ethical obligations. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need to enhance how real estate professionals in Manitoba explain the fundamental concept of a property's definition and its importance to clients. Considering this, which approach best ensures a client makes an informed decision about selling their property? Option A. Assume the client has a complete understanding of their property's definition and importance, and proceed directly to pricing and marketing strategies. Option B. Focus marketing efforts on superficial appealing features and the client's stated preference for a rapid sale, without detailed discussion of the property's intrinsic qualities. Option C. Provide a general, textbook definition of real estate and its importance without relating it to the client's specific property or the local Manitoba market. Option D. Proactively educate the client on how their specific property's zoning, land use, unique physical characteristics, and potential development contribute to its value and marketability within the Manitoba real estate landscape. The correct answer is D. Proactively educate the client on how their specific property's zoning, land use, unique physical characteristics, and potential development contribute to its value and marketability within the Manitoba real estate landscape. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate professional in Manitoba to balance the client's immediate desire for a quick sale with their fiduciary duty to ensure the client understands the full implications of the property's definition and importance. Misrepresenting or downplaying the significance of the property's characteristics could lead to a sale that is not in the client's best interest, potentially violating ethical standards and regulatory obligations under the Real Estate Services Act of Manitoba. The challenge lies in providing comprehensive, unbiased information without overwhelming the client or jeopardizing the transaction. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively educating the client about the definition and importance of their specific property within the Manitoba real estate market. This includes explaining how factors like zoning, land use designations, potential for development, and unique physical characteristics, e.g., waterfront access, historical significance, contribute to its value and marketability. This approach aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest and the regulatory requirement to provide competent service, ensuring the client makes an informed decision. It directly addresses the core of the definition and importance of real estate by contextualizing it for the client's specific asset. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on marketing the property based on superficial features and the client's stated desire for a quick sale, without delving into the underlying definition and importance of the property itself. This fails to uphold the duty of care and competence, as it neglects to provide essential information that could significantly impact the client's understanding of the property's true value and potential. Risks a sale based on incomplete information, potentially leading to client dissatisfaction or legal recourse. Another incorrect approach is to provide a generic overview of real estate definitions without tailoring it to the specific property and its Manitoba context. While technically providing information, it lacks the depth and specificity required to be truly beneficial to the client. The importance of a property is intrinsically linked to its unique attributes and its place within the local market, which a generic explanation cannot adequately convey. This approach is insufficient in fulfilling the professional's duty to provide relevant and actionable advice. A third incorrect approach is to assume the client already possesses a comprehensive understanding of their property's definition and importance, and to proceed directly to pricing and marketing strategies. This overlooks the professional's responsibility to ensure clarity and understanding, especially when dealing with complex assets. It is a failure to proactively identify and address potential knowledge gaps, which can lead to misunderstandings and a compromised client experience. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric approach that prioritizes education and informed consent. This involves a thorough assessment of the client's understanding, followed by tailored explanations of how the property's definition and importance, within the specific context of Manitoba, influence its market value and sale prospects. This proactive educational strategy builds trust, ensures compliance with ethical and regulatory standards, and ultimately leads to better outcomes for the client. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate property management practices for a portfolio of residential properties in Manitoba, considering the potential for disputes and the importance of maintaining property value. Which of the following strategies best addresses the identified need for improved risk assessment and management? Option A. Implementing a proactive maintenance schedule based on regular property inspections and ensuring all lease agreements strictly adhere to the Residential Tenancies Act, Manitoba, coupled with transparent communication protocols for both owners and tenants. Option B. Adopting a reactive approach where maintenance requests are addressed only after tenants formally submit complaints and lease terms are interpreted in the most owner-favorable manner possible. Option C. Focusing on minimizing immediate operational expenses by deferring non-critical repairs and reducing the frequency of routine property checks, with communication primarily directed to the property owner. Option D. Establishing a system where all tenant inquiries and concerns are filtered through the property owner before any action is taken by the property manager, prioritizing the owner's immediate financial interests. The correct answer is A. Implementing a proactive maintenance schedule based on regular property inspections and ensuring all lease agreements strictly adhere to the Residential Tenancies Act, Manitoba, coupled with transparent communication protocols for both owners and tenants. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to reevaluate property management practices for a portfolio of residential properties in Manitoba. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the property owner's financial objectives with the tenant's right to quiet enjoyment and safe living conditions, all within the specific legal framework of Manitoba. A property manager must navigate potential conflicts of interest, ensure compliance with provincial legislation, and maintain ethical standards to foster positive landlord-tenant relationships and protect the value of the assets. The best approach involves proactively identifying and mitigating potential risks before they escalate into significant problems. This includes conducting thorough inspections to identify maintenance needs, ensuring all lease agreements comply with the Residential Tenancies Act, Manitoba, and establishing clear communication channels with both owners and tenants. By prioritizing preventative maintenance and transparent communication, a property manager can minimize vacancies, reduce repair costs, and avoid disputes that could lead to costly legal proceedings or damage to the property's reputation. This aligns with the ethical duty of care owed to both the owner and the tenant, and the regulatory requirement to manage properties competently and in accordance with Manitoba law. An approach that focuses solely on responding to tenant complaints as they arise is professionally unacceptable. This reactive strategy fails to address underlying issues, potentially leading to tenant dissatisfaction, lease violations, and increased repair costs due to deferred maintenance. It also risks contravening the Residential Tenancies Act by not ensuring properties are maintained in a reasonable state of repair, which could result in orders from the Residential Tenancies Branch. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to prioritize cost-cutting measures above all else, such as delaying necessary repairs or neglecting routine maintenance. This can lead to significant property damage, health and safety hazards for tenants, and ultimately, higher expenses for the owner in the long run. Such actions could also violate the landlord's obligations under the Residential Tenancies Act to maintain the premises in a good state of repair. Finally, an approach that involves communicating primarily with the owner and bypassing direct communication with tenants regarding property issues is also professionally flawed. This can create a sense of distrust and disengagement among tenants, making it harder to manage the property effectively and potentially leading to misunderstandings or unresolved issues. The Residential Tenancies Act emphasizes fair dealings and communication, and a property manager has a responsibility to facilitate this. Professionals should adopt a proactive, risk-based approach. This involves understanding the specific regulatory environment, the Residential Tenancies Act, Manitoba, anticipating potential issues, implementing preventative measures, and maintaining open and honest communication with all stakeholders. Regular property assessments, adherence to lease terms, and prompt, fair resolution of issues are key components of responsible property management. Question 7. Market research demonstrates that a property in Winnipeg, Manitoba, features a small, independently operated bakery on the ground floor, generating a significant portion of its income, and 3 self-contained residential apartments on the upper floors, which are currently occupied by long-term tenants. The owner is considering selling the property and has expressed a desire to market it primarily as a residential investment. Which approach best guides the real estate professional in determining the property's classification for marketing and sale purposes in Manitoba? Option A. Classify the property based on its predominant use, considering the proportion of space, revenue generation, and zoning regulations to accurately reflect its primary function in Winnipeg. Option B. Classify the property as purely commercial due to the presence of the bakery, even though the residential units occupy a larger physical space. Option C. Classify the property based on the potential for future development, overlooking its current mixed-use nature. Option D. Classify the property solely based on the owner's stated desire to market it as a residential investment, irrespective of the commercial activity. The correct answer is A. Classify the property based on its predominant use, considering the proportion of space, revenue generation, and zoning regulations to accurately reflect its primary function in Winnipeg. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate professional to accurately identify the primary classification of a property based on its predominant use, which has significant implications for marketing, financing, and regulatory compliance in Manitoba. Misclassifying the property could lead to misrepresentation, failed transactions, and potential disciplinary action. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between mixed-use properties and those with a clear dominant classification. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves thoroughly investigating the property's current and intended primary use, considering factors like the proportion of space dedicated to each use, the source of revenue, and the zoning regulations in place in Manitoba. This approach recognizes that, while a property might have elements of different types, its classification for real estate purposes is determined by its predominant function. For example, a building with a small retail space on the ground floor and several residential apartments above would likely be classified as residential if the residential component generates the majority of the income and represents the largest portion of the usable space. Aligning with the principles of accurate property description and marketing under the Real Estate Services Act of Manitoba. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to classify the property solely based on the presence of any commercial activity, regardless of its scale or revenue generation. This fails to acknowledge the predominant use principle and could lead to marketing the property as purely commercial, which would be inaccurate and misleading to potential buyers or tenants interested in residential living. This violates the duty of honesty and integrity required of real estate professionals in Manitoba. Another incorrect approach is to classify the property based on the owner's personal preference or stated intention without verifying the actual use or zoning. This ignores the objective reality of the property's function and the legal framework governing its use in Manitoba. It could result in marketing a property under false pretenses, leading to legal complications and a breach of professional standards. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the mixed-use nature and arbitrarily assign it to a category that seems most convenient for the transaction. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the accurate representation of the property. It fails to consider the specific requirements and expectations associated with each property type in the Manitoba real estate market, potentially leading to a transaction that is not suitable for the buyer or tenant. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes due diligence, accurate representation, and adherence to provincial regulations. This involves 1. Understanding the property's physical characteristics and current use. 2. Investigating zoning bylaws and any restrictions or permissions related to property use in the specific Manitoba municipality. 3. Analyzing revenue streams and the proportion of space dedicated to each potential classification. 4. Consulting with the client to understand their intended use while cross-referencing this with objective data. 5. Accurately classifying the property based on its predominant use, ensuring all marketing and disclosure materials reflect this classification. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of potential homebuyers in Manitoba may benefit from government-backed mortgage insurance programs. A prospective buyer who has a modest down payment and is concerned about qualifying for a conventional mortgage asks their Manitoba real estate agent about options that could help them secure financing. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent? Option A. Inform the buyer about the general availability of CMHC-insured mortgage programs and advise them to consult with a mortgage broker or lender for specific eligibility and application details. Option B. Ask the buyer detailed questions about their income, employment history, and debts to estimate their chances of qualifying for a CMHC-insured mortgage. Option C. Assure the buyer that they will likely qualify for a CMHC-insured mortgage if they have a down payment of at least 5% and can provide basic income verification. Option D. Advise the buyer that CMHC-insured mortgages are generally more difficult to obtain than conventional mortgages and are not typically suitable for their situation without further investigation. The correct answer is A. Inform the buyer about the general availability of CMHC-insured mortgage programs and advise them to consult with a mortgage broker or lender for specific eligibility and application details. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Manitoba real estate agent because it requires navigating the complexities of government-backed loan programs, specifically the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC programs, which are distinct from private lending. The agent must ensure they are providing accurate and compliant advice to their client, avoiding misrepresentations that could lead to financial harm for the buyer or regulatory repercussions for the agent. The challenge lies in understanding the eligibility criteria and program nuances to guide the client effectively, without overstepping professional boundaries or providing unauthorized financial advice. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the agent accurately informing the client about the existence and general purpose of CMHC-insured mortgage programs as potential options for financing a property purchase in Manitoba. This includes explaining that these programs are designed to assist buyers who may not qualify for conventional mortgages due to factors like lower down payments. Crucially, the agent must then advise the client to consult with a qualified mortgage broker or lender who specializes in these government-backed programs. This approach is correct because it aligns with the agent's role as a facilitator of real estate transactions, not a financial advisor. It respects the regulatory boundaries by providing general information about available financing avenues, while directing the client to the appropriate financial professionals for specific advice and application processes, thereby ensuring compliance with real estate licensing regulations in Manitoba that prohibit the unlicensed practice of mortgage brokering or financial advising. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves the agent attempting to pre-qualify the client for a CMHC-insured mortgage by asking detailed questions about their income, debts, and credit history, and then advising them on their likelihood of approval. This is an ethical and regulatory failure because it constitutes the unlicensed practice of mortgage brokering or financial advising, which is outside the scope of a real estate agent's license in Manitoba. Another incorrect approach is for the agent to dismiss CMHC-insured mortgages as being too complex or only for first-time buyers without fully understanding the client's specific situation or the program's current eligibility. This failure to explore all potentially viable financing options could disadvantage the client and demonstrates a lack of diligence. Finally, an agent who guarantees the client will be approved for a CMHC-insured mortgage based on a brief discussion is engaging in misrepresentation and making promises they cannot fulfill, which is a serious ethical breach and a violation of real estate advertising and conduct regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and referral to qualified specialists. When discussing financing, agents should focus on identifying potential financing avenues and then clearly directing clients to mortgage brokers, lenders, or financial institutions for detailed assessments and advice. This ensures that clients receive accurate, tailored financial guidance from licensed professionals, while the agent remains within their authorized scope of practice. Question 9. The assessment process reveals that a client purchasing a property in Winnipeg, Manitoba, is concerned about their mortgage application being approved due to some recent fluctuations in their income. The client asks their real estate agent to help them present their financial situation to the mortgage lender in the most favorable light possible, suggesting that certain less consistent income sources might be omitted from the application. What is the most appropriate course of action for the real estate agent in this situation? Option A. Complete the mortgage application form on behalf of the client, filling in the income details as the client suggests, and submit it to the lender to expedite the process. Option B. Advise the client on the critical importance of providing complete and accurate financial disclosure to the mortgage lender, explaining that any omissions could jeopardize their mortgage approval, and that the lender will verify all provided information. The agent should then encourage the client to discuss their income situation directly with the lender and provide all necessary supporting documentation. Option C. Inform the client that while honesty is important, it's common practice to focus on the most stable income streams when applying for a mortgage and offer to help them draft the application accordingly. Option D. Agree to the client's request and assist in omitting the less consistent income sources from the mortgage application to present a stronger financial profile to the lender. The correct answer is B. Advise the client on the critical importance of providing complete and accurate financial disclosure to the mortgage lender, explaining that any omissions could jeopardize their mortgage approval and that the lender will verify all provided information. The agent should then encourage the client to discuss their income situation directly with the lender and provide all necessary supporting documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the real estate agent to navigate the delicate balance between assisting a client and upholding the integrity of the mortgage application process. The agent must recognize the limitations of their role and avoid actions that could be construed as misrepresentation or undue influence, which could jeopardize the client's mortgage approval and expose the agent to regulatory scrutiny under Manitoba's real estate legislation. Careful judgment is required to ensure all information provided is accurate and that the client understands their responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the agent clearly and proactively advising the client on the importance of accurate financial disclosure to the mortgage lender. This approach emphasizes transparency and educates the client about the lender's requirements and the potential consequences of providing incomplete or misleading information. By guiding the client to directly communicate with the lender and providing them with the necessary documentation, the agent facilitates an ethical and compliant mortgage application process. This aligns with the principles of professional conduct expected of licensed real estate professionals in Manitoba, which mandate honesty and integrity in all dealings. Incorrect approach is analysis. Providing the lender with information that the agent knows is incomplete or inaccurate, even if the client requested it, constitutes a failure to uphold professional integrity and honesty. This could lead to the mortgage being denied, or worse, to accusations of misrepresentation, which are serious breaches of Manitoba's real estate regulations. Suggesting to the client that certain financial details can be omitted or downplayed to improve their chances of approval is unethical and potentially illegal. This action undermines the lender's ability to assess risk accurately and could result in significant financial repercussions for both the client and the lender. It directly violates the duty of honesty and fair dealing. Directly completing and submitting financial information on behalf of the client without their full understanding and explicit authorization, especially if the agent is not qualified to provide financial advice, oversteps the agent's professional boundaries. This could be seen as unauthorized practice and a failure to ensure the client is fully informed and responsible for their own disclosures. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and transparency while strictly adhering to regulatory boundaries. This involves understanding the scope of their professional responsibilities, clearly communicating these limitations to clients, and empowering clients to provide accurate information directly to the relevant parties, such as mortgage lenders. When faced with a situation where a client's request might compromise ethical or regulatory standards, the professional's duty is to educate the client on the correct procedures and potential risks, rather than facilitating a potentially problematic outcome. Question 10. Process analysis reveals that a property in Winnipeg, Manitoba, listed for $500,000, sold for $485,000. The listing agreement stipulates a total commission of 5% of the sale price. The listing brokerage has an agreement with the buyer's brokerage to split the commission 50/50. The listing agent's brokerage retains 60% of the commission received by their brokerage, and the buyer's agent's brokerage retains 40% of the commission received by their brokerage. If the listing agent is to receive 70% of their brokerage share, and the buyer's agent is to receive 65% of their brokerage share, what is the net commission amount each agent will receive? Option A. The listing agent will receive $72,750 and the buyer's agent will receive $54,562.50. Option B. The listing agent will receive $60,000 and the buyer's agent will receive $40,000. Option C. The listing agent will receive $63,525 and the buyer's agent will receive $45,760. Option D. The listing agent will receive $63,525 and the buyer's agent will receive $45,760. Correct answer is D. The listing agent will receive $63,525 and the buyer's agent will receive $45,760. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate agents in Manitoba, accurately calculating commission splits when multiple agents are involved in a transaction. The professional challenge lies in ensuring fair compensation for all parties while adhering to the terms of the listing agreement and the Manitoba Real Estate Association (MREA) bylaws, which govern commission disputes and distribution. Miscalculations can lead to disputes, damage professional relationships, and potentially violate contractual obligations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a precise calculation based on the agreed-upon commission rate and the specific split outlined in the listing agreement and any subsequent agreements between brokerages. This approach prioritizes transparency and adherence to contractual terms. The total commission is calculated first, and then this amount is divided according to the percentages agreed upon by the listing brokerage and the buyer's brokerage, and subsequently by the individual agents within their respective brokerages. This aligns with the principles of contractual integrity and fair dealing expected of licensed real estate professionals in Manitoba. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply divide the total commission equally among all agents involved without considering the agreed-upon split percentages. This fails to respect the contractual terms of the listing agreement and any interbrokerage agreements, potentially leading to underpayment of one party and overpayment of another, violating professional obligations. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize the buyer's agent's perceived contribution over the agreed-upon split. While collaboration is important, the commission split is a predetermined contractual matter. Deviating from this based on subjective assessments of effort can lead to disputes and breaches of contract, and may also contravene MREA bylaws regarding commission disputes. A third incorrect approach is to use a rounded or estimated commission amount for the calculation. Real estate commissions are typically calculated to the cent. Inaccurate rounding can lead to minor discrepancies that, when compounded across multiple transactions or when dealing with significant commission amounts, can result in financial disputes and demonstrate a lack of diligence and professionalism. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always refer to the executed listing agreement and any written addendums or agreements between brokerages to determine the commission split. Calculations should be precise, using the exact commission rate and split percentages. If there is any ambiguity, agents should seek clarification from their broker or legal counsel before distributing funds. Maintaining clear, documented communication and accurate records is paramount to avoiding disputes and upholding professional standards in Manitoba. Question 11. During the evaluation of a potential multi-unit residential investment property in Winnipeg, Manitoba, a real estate professional is presented with optimistic financial projections by the seller. The property is older, and the seller emphasizes the strong current rental demand. What is the most prudent approach for the real estate professional to take to ensure they are acting in the client's best interest and adhering to Manitoba's real estate regulations? Option A. Advise the client to proceed with the purchase based on the strong rental demand, assuming that any necessary repairs can be addressed with future rental income. Option B. Conduct a thorough due diligence process, including a professional property inspection, a review of local market comparables for both sales and rental rates, and an investigation into current zoning and any potential upcoming municipal bylaws that could affect rental properties, while also assessing the property's age-related maintenance needs and associated costs. Option C. Rely primarily on the seller's assurances regarding the property's condition and market value, and prioritize closing the deal quickly to earn the commission. Option D. Accept the seller's financial projections at face value and focus on negotiating the best possible purchase price to maximize the client's immediate return on investment. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough due diligence process, including a professional property inspection, a review of local market comparables for both sales and rental rates, and an investigation into current zoning and any potential upcoming municipal bylaws that could affect rental properties, while also assessing the property's age-related maintenance needs and associated costs. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate professional in Manitoba to balance the client's desire for a quick profit with the fundamental obligation to conduct thorough due diligence and provide objective advice. The pressure to close a deal quickly can sometimes lead to overlooking crucial risk factors, which is a direct contravention of professional standards and the Manitoba Real Estate Services Act. Professional must prioritize the client's best interests, which includes informing them of potential risks, even if it means slowing down a transaction or advising against it. The best approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that goes beyond surface-level financial projections. This includes meticulously investigating the property's physical condition, zoning regulations, environmental concerns, and market comparables. Furthermore, understanding the local Manitoba market trends, including potential economic shifts or changes in demand for similar properties, is crucial. This holistic view allows for the identification of potential liabilities and opportunities that might not be immediately apparent. This approach aligns with the Manitoba Real Estate Services Act's requirement for registrants to act with honesty and integrity, and to provide competent service, which necessitates a thorough understanding of all relevant factors affecting a real estate investment. An approach that focuses solely on the projected rental income, without considering the property's age and potential for immediate costly repairs, is professionally unacceptable. This failure to investigate the physical condition of the property could lead to significant unexpected expenses for the client, directly contradicting the duty to act in the client's best interest and potentially violating the Manitoba Real Estate Services Act's provisions regarding due diligence. Another unacceptable approach is to rely solely on the seller's representations regarding the property's condition and market value without independent verification. This demonstrates a lack of professional skepticism and a failure to conduct necessary investigations, exposing the client to potential misrepresentation and financial loss. This directly contravenes the ethical obligation to provide objective advice and conduct thorough due diligence as expected of a licensed real estate professional in Manitoba. Finally, an approach that prioritizes securing the commission over advising the client on potential risks is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. The professional's primary duty is to the client, not to their own financial gain. Failing to disclose material risks, even if they might jeopardize the sale, is a violation of trust and professional conduct expected under Manitoba's real estate regulations. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives and risk tolerance. This is followed by a systematic process of information gathering, including property inspections, market research, and legal/zoning reviews. All identified risks and potential rewards must be clearly communicated to the client, enabling them to make an informed decision. The professional's role is to guide and advise, not to pressure or mislead. Question 12. What factors determine the appropriate disclosure strategy for a known material latent defect in a residential property located in Manitoba when the seller instructs the real estate professional to withhold this information from potential buyers? Option A. The perceived likelihood of a buyer discovering the defect through a standard home inspection. Option B. The seller's desire for a quick sale and their instruction to only disclose information if directly inquired about by a buyer. Option C. The extent of cosmetic repairs the seller is willing to undertake to improve the property's appearance before listing. Option D. The legal and ethical obligations of the real estate professional to disclose material latent defects, as defined by the Manitoba Real Estate Services Act and the MREA Code of Ethics. The correct answer is D. The legal and ethical obligations of the real estate professional to disclose material latent defects, as defined by the Manitoba Real Estate Services Act and the MREA Code of Ethics. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate professional in Manitoba to balance the client's immediate desire for a quick sale with the ethical and legal obligation to disclose material latent defects. Failing to disclose a known defect can lead to significant legal repercussions, loss of reputation, and disciplinary action from the Manitoba Real Estate Association, MREA. The challenge lies in navigating the client's instructions against the backdrop of the Real Estate Services Act and the MREA Code of Ethics, which prioritize transparency and honesty in real estate transactions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves advising the seller that the known foundation issue is a material latent defect that must be disclosed to potential buyers. This aligns directly with the principles of honesty, integrity, and disclosure mandated by the Manitoba Real Estate Services Act and the MREA Code of Ethics. Specifically, Section 40 of the Real Estate Services Act requires registrants to disclose all material facts known to them that are not discoverable by a reasonable inspection of the property. A significant foundation issue is undeniably a material fact. Ethically, withholding such information erodes trust and can lead to future disputes and legal liabilities for all parties involved, including the agent. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, protecting both the buyer and the seller from future complications. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the seller to simply not mention the foundation issue, hoping a buyer won't discover it during a home inspection, is a direct violation of the disclosure requirements under the Real Estate Services Act. This constitutes misrepresentation by omission and is ethically unacceptable, as it deliberately conceals a material fact. Suggesting the seller undertake minor cosmetic repairs to the basement walls to mask the foundation problem before listing is also problematic. While repairs might be a good idea, the underlying defect still exists and is a material latent defect. Failing to disclose the original issue, even after superficial repairs, is still a breach of disclosure obligations. The buyer is entitled to know the history and the true condition of the property, not just its current appearance. Recommending that the seller only disclose the issue if directly asked by a buyer during negotiations is insufficient. The obligation is to proactively disclose material latent defects that are not readily apparent. Waiting for a direct question does not absolve the registrant of their duty to disclose known material facts. This approach is reactive rather than proactive and fails to meet the standard of full disclosure required by law and ethical practice. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Manitoba should adopt a proactive and transparent approach. When faced with a known material latent defect, the first step is to educate the client about their legal and ethical obligations regarding disclosure under the Real Estate Services Act and MREA guidelines. The professional should clearly explain what constitutes a material latent defect and the consequences of non-disclosure. The recommended course of action is always to disclose the defect to potential buyers, either in the listing agreement or through a written disclosure statement, and to advise the seller that this is a necessary step for a legally sound and ethically conducted transaction. If the seller refuses to consent to disclosure, the professional must consider their own ethical obligations and potentially withdraw from representing the seller, as continuing to represent them would likely involve participating in a breach of the Act. Question 13. The performance metrics show a significant increase in demand for multi-unit residential properties in Winnipeg. As a licensed real estate agent in Manitoba, you are tasked with advising a client on the potential sale price of a well-maintained apartment building. Considering the unique nature of this property type, which valuation method would best reflect its market value and why? Option A. The income approach, as it directly assesses the property's ability to generate revenue, which is the primary driver of value for investment properties. Option B. A hybrid approach combining elements of the cost approach and a basic neighborhood price per unit average. Option C. The cost approach, by estimating the cost to rebuild the apartment building from scratch and subtracting for depreciation. Option D. The comparative market analysis, CMA, by comparing it to recently sold single-family homes in the surrounding neighborhood. The correct answer is A. The income approach, as it directly assesses the property's ability to generate revenue, which is the primary driver of value for investment properties. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Manitoba real estate agent because it requires them to select the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property type, balancing the needs of a client with the regulatory requirements for accurate and ethical property appraisals. The agent must understand the limitations and strengths of each valuation method in the context of the specific property and its intended use, ensuring the advice provided is both legally compliant and professionally sound. The risk lies in recommending a method that is either insufficient for the property's characteristics or misrepresents its potential value, leading to client dissatisfaction, potential legal recourse, and damage to the agent's reputation and brokerage. Correct approach analysis. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the income approach. This method is best suited for properties that generate or are intended to generate income, such as a multi-unit residential building or a commercial property. It involves analyzing the potential rental income, vacancy rates, operating expenses, and capitalization rates to estimate the property's value based on its ability to produce a return on investment. In Manitoba, the Real Estate Services Act and its associated regulations, along with the Real Estate Council of Manitoba, RECM, Code of Ethics, mandate that registrants provide competent and diligent service. This includes using valuation methods that are relevant and reliable for the specific property type. The income approach directly addresses the primary driver of value for income-producing properties, aligning with the ethical obligation to provide an accurate and relevant valuation. Incorrect approach is analysis, using the comparative market analysis, CMA, as the primary valuation method for an income-producing property would be professionally unsound and potentially violate ethical obligations. While CMAs are valuable for residential properties, they primarily rely on recent sales of similar properties. For income-producing properties, the market sales data may not fully reflect the income-generating potential, which is a critical factor in their valuation. Failing to adequately consider the income-generating capacity could lead to an inaccurate valuation and misrepresentation of the property's true worth, contravening the duty of competence and diligence. The cost approach, which estimates the cost to replace or reproduce the property, less depreciation, is also generally unsuitable as the primary method for an income-producing property. This approach is more appropriate for special-purpose properties or new construction where comparable sales are scarce, and income potential is not the primary determinant of value. Applying the cost approach to an income-producing property would ignore its fundamental value driver, its ability to generate income, and therefore would not provide a reliable or accurate valuation, failing to meet the professional standard of care required by Manitoba real estate regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Manitoba must adopt a risk-based decision-making process when selecting valuation methods. This involves first understanding the nature of the property and its intended use. For income-producing properties, the income approach is the default consideration due to its direct correlation with value. If the income approach is not feasible due to lack of data or other limitations, the agent should then consider other approaches, but always with a clear understanding of their limitations in the context of income generation. The agent must also be aware of the RECM guidelines on appraisals and valuations, ensuring that the chosen method is defensible and provides a reasonable estimate of market value. Transparency with the client about the chosen method and its rationale is also crucial for maintaining trust and fulfilling ethical obligations. Question 14. Process analysis reveals that a seller in Manitoba instructs their real estate agent to exclusively market their property to a specific individual who has previously expressed interest, stating that they believe this individual will offer the best price and are not interested in receiving other offers. What is the most appropriate course of action for the real estate agent to take? Option A. Refuse the seller's request outright without explaining the legal and ethical reasons behind this refusal. Option B. Contact the preferred individual immediately and arrange a sale, assuming their offer will be the best and fulfilling the seller's directive without further discussion. Option C. Inform the seller that the request is unusual and proceed to contact only the preferred buyer, without emphasizing the requirement to present and consider all offers fairly. Option D. Advise the seller that while the request is unusual, the agent will contact the preferred individual and explain that all offers must still be presented and considered fairly according to Manitoba real estate regulations. The correct answer is D. Advise the seller that while the request is unusual, the agent will contact the preferred individual and explain that all offers must still be presented and considered fairly according to Manitoba real estate regulations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's expressed desire and the legal and ethical obligations of a real estate professional. The agent must navigate the client's instructions while ensuring compliance with Manitoba's Real Estate Services Act and its associated regulations, as well as general principles of fiduciary duty and professional conduct. Failure to do so could result in disciplinary action, civil liability, and damage to the agent's reputation. The core challenge lies in balancing client advocacy with legal and ethical boundaries. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves advising the client on the legal implications of their request and explaining why it cannot be fulfilled as stated. This approach prioritizes transparency and education, ensuring the client understands the boundaries of legal and ethical conduct in real estate transactions within Manitoba. The agent must clearly articulate that directing the sale exclusively to a specific buyer without a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason and without considering other potential offers violates principles of fair dealing and potentially the Manitoba Human Rights Code if the exclusion is based on a protected characteristic. The agent's duty is to market the property to the broadest possible audience to achieve the best possible price for the seller, unless there are specific, legally permissible reasons for a more targeted approach. This involves explaining that all offers must be presented and considered fairly. Incorrect approaches analysis. Advising the client that the request is unusual but proceeding to contact only the preferred buyer without further consultation or explanation of legal ramifications is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks facilitating a potentially discriminatory or unfair practice, failing to uphold the agent's duty to market the property effectively and ethically. Bypasses the crucial step of educating the client about their legal obligations and the agent's professional responsibilities. Directly refusing the client's request without providing a clear, reasoned explanation based on Manitoba's real estate laws and ethical standards is also professionally deficient. While the request may be problematic, a complete refusal without explanation can lead to client dissatisfaction and a misunderstanding of the agent's role and limitations. The agent has a duty to explain why certain actions cannot be taken. Agreeing to the client's request and immediately contacting the preferred buyer, assuming they will offer the best price, is a serious ethical and legal failure. This approach disregards the agent's fiduciary duty to the seller to market the property broadly and obtain the best possible price. It also opens the door to potential allegations of collusion or preferential treatment, which are contrary to the principles of fair and open competition in real estate transactions. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a risk assessment framework that begins with identifying the client's request. Next, they must evaluate this request against the relevant legal framework, e.g., Manitoba's Real Estate Services Act, Residential Tenancies Act, and Human Rights Code, and professional ethical codes. If the request appears to conflict with these obligations, the professional's next step is to educate the client about the legal and ethical boundaries, explaining why the request cannot be fulfilled as stated and proposing alternative compliance strategies. This ensures informed consent and maintains professional integrity. Question 15. The audit findings indicate that a real estate professional in Manitoba has been presented with recent economic data showing rising interest rates, increasing inflation, and a slight uptick in unemployment figures. What is the most appropriate professional approach for the real estate professional to take in response to this information? Option A. Analyze the specific impact of these economic factors on the Manitoba real estate market and use this analysis to provide informed, objective advice to clients regarding their buying or selling decisions. Option B. Advise clients that the current economic climate will inevitably lead to a significant downturn in the Manitoba real estate market, encouraging them to postpone all transactions. Option C. Disregard the national economic data as having minimal direct impact on local real estate transactions within Manitoba. Option D. Focus solely on the potential for increased property values in the long term, downplaying the immediate effects of the current economic indicators on market activity. The correct answer is A. Analyze the specific impact of these economic factors on the Manitoba real estate market and use this analysis to provide informed, objective advice to clients regarding their buying or selling decisions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a real estate professional in Manitoba because it requires them to interpret and respond to economic indicators that directly impact market conditions and client decisions. Failing to accurately assess these factors or provide appropriate guidance can lead to misinformed client choices, potential financial losses for clients, and damage to the professional's reputation and adherence to professional standards. The challenge lies in translating broad economic trends into actionable advice relevant to specific real estate transactions within the Manitoba market. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive analysis of the identified economic factors and their specific implications for the Manitoba real estate market. This includes understanding how interest rate changes, inflation, and employment figures influence buyer affordability, seller willingness to list, and overall market demand and supply dynamics within Manitoba. The professional should then use this analysis to provide informed, objective advice to their clients, helping them make strategic decisions based on current and projected market conditions. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the client's best interest and to provide competent service, as mandated by real estate licensing regulations in Manitoba, which require professionals to be knowledgeable about market conditions. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the economic indicators as irrelevant to the local Manitoba market without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge the interconnectedness of national economic trends with provincial real estate markets and violates the duty to provide informed advice. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and market awareness, which is a breach of professional conduct. Another incorrect approach would be to offer speculative or overly optimistic advice based solely on past market performance, ignoring the current economic headwinds. This can mislead clients into making poor investment decisions and exposes the professional to liability. It disregards the requirement to provide advice that is grounded in current market realities and economic forecasts. A third incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on the potential negative impacts of the economic factors without presenting a balanced view of potential opportunities or mitigation strategies. This can unnecessarily alarm clients and prevent them from making timely and beneficial decisions. It falls short of providing comprehensive and objective guidance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes thorough research and objective analysis. This involves 1. Identifying and understanding relevant economic indicators. 2. Researching how these indicators are specifically impacting the Manitoba real estate market. 3. Synthesizing this information to form a clear, objective assessment of current and potential future market conditions. 4. Communicating this assessment to clients in a clear, understandable manner, offering strategic advice tailored to their individual circumstances and goals. 5. Continuously monitoring economic trends and market shifts to provide ongoing, relevant guidance. Question 16. The audit findings indicate that a real estate agent in Manitoba has been asked by a property owner to advertise a rental unit with the specific wording, "Ideal for a single professional, no children please." The agent is unsure how to proceed, considering the owner's request and their professional obligations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent? Option A. Suggest to the owner that they rephrase the advertisement to "adults only," believing this is a less discriminatory alternative that still conveys their preference. Option B. Place the advertisement as requested by the owner, but verbally inform the owner that such wording might be problematic and could lead to complaints. Option C. Refuse to place the advertisement as worded, explaining to the owner that the phrase, "No children please," is discriminatory and violates the Human Rights Code of Manitoba, and offer to create an advertisement that focuses on the property's features and suitability for various individuals without discriminatory preferences. Option D. Advise the owner that while the wording is not ideal, it is their property and their decision, and proceed with placing the advertisement as requested. The correct answer is C. Refuse to place the advertisement as worded, explaining to the owner that the phrase, "No children please," is discriminatory and violates the Human Rights Code of Manitoba, and offer to create an advertisement that focuses on the property's features and suitability for various individuals without discriminatory preferences. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breach of fair housing principles in Manitoba, presenting a professionally challenging situation. The challenge lies in balancing the property owner's stated preferences with the legal obligation to provide equal housing opportunities, as mandated by the Human Rights Code of Manitoba. Misinterpreting or ignoring these obligations can lead to significant legal repercussions, reputational damage, and harm to individuals seeking housing. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant and ethically sound. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding of the Human Rights Code of Manitoba and its application to rental advertising. This approach prioritizes non-discrimination by ensuring that any advertisement for a residential property in Manitoba does not express a limitation, specification, or preference based on protected grounds such as family status, sex, or marital status, unless such a limitation is a bona fide occupational requirement or a bona fide requirement of the premises. Specifically, the agent must refuse to place an advertisement that suggests a preference for a particular type of tenant that could be interpreted as discriminatory. This aligns directly with the spirit and letter of Manitoba's human rights legislation, which aims to prevent discrimination in housing. An incorrect approach would be to argue that the owner's preference is simply a personal choice and not discriminatory. This fails to recognize that the Human Rights Code of Manitoba prohibits discrimination in the provision of services, including housing, and that advertising a preference that indirectly excludes protected groups constitutes discrimination. Another incorrect approach is to suggest that the agent should place the advertisement as requested, but advise the owner verbally about potential issues. This is insufficient, as the act of placing a discriminatory advertisement itself is a violation, regardless of subsequent verbal warnings. Furthermore, an incorrect approach would be to claim that the agent has no responsibility, as they are merely acting on the owner's instructions. Real estate agents in Manitoba have a professional and legal duty to uphold fair housing laws and cannot abdicate their responsibility by simply following client instructions that contravene these laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core legal and ethical obligations relevant to the situation. This involves consulting relevant legislation, such as the Human Rights Code of Manitoba and professional codes of conduct. The next step is to assess the specific facts against these obligations. If a conflict arises, as it does in this scenario, the professional must prioritize compliance with the law and ethical standards. This means refusing to engage in or facilitate discriminatory practices, even if it means potentially losing a client or facing initial resistance. Open communication with the client about the legal and ethical reasons for refusal is crucial, along with offering compliant alternatives. Question 17. The monitoring system demonstrates that a buyer in a Manitoba real estate transaction has indicated they are unable to secure financing as per the subject to financing clause in the accepted offer, and has subsequently proposed a revised offer with different terms. The seller is now seeking advice on how to proceed. What is the most appropriate course of action for the real estate professional representing the seller? Option A. Immediately advise the seller to accept the buyer's revised offer, as the buyer has indicated a willingness to renegotiate terms. Option B. Advise the seller to return the buyer's deposit immediately to avoid further complications, as the buyer has stated they cannot secure financing. Option C. Advise the seller to carefully review the original agreement of purchase and sale to determine if the buyer has met the conditions of the financing clause within the stipulated time frame, and to consult legal counsel regarding the enforceability of the original contract before considering any revised offers. Option D. Encourage the seller to pressure the buyer to waive the financing condition, as the buyer is still interested in the property. The correct answer is C. Advise the seller to carefully review the original agreement of purchase and sale to determine if the buyer has met the conditions of the financing clause within the stipulated time frame, and to consult legal counsel regarding the enforceability of the original contract before considering any revised offers. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential breach of contract due to a misunderstanding of a key term, which could lead to legal disputes and financial repercussions for both parties. The real estate professional must navigate the contractual obligations while ensuring fair dealing and adherence to Manitoba's real estate legislation. The core issue is determining whether the initial agreement, as written, is enforceable given the subsequent actions and stated intentions of the buyer. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the written agreement of purchase and sale, specifically focusing on the definition and implications of the subject to financing clause as it is written in the contract. This approach is correct because the enforceability of a real estate contract in Manitoba hinges on the clear and unambiguous terms agreed upon by both parties. If the clause is clearly defined and the buyer has not met its conditions within the stipulated time frame, the contract may be voidable at the seller's discretion. The agent's primary duty is to uphold the terms of the executed contract and advise their client accordingly, referring them to legal counsel if necessary for interpretation of complex clauses or potential disputes. This aligns with the principles of good faith and professional conduct expected under Manitoba's real estate regulations, which emphasize the importance of written agreements and the agent's role in facilitating a transaction based on those terms. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately advise the seller to accept the buyer's revised offer without a formal termination of the existing contract. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses the contractual obligations already in place. The existing contract, if valid, must be addressed first, either by fulfilling its conditions or by a mutually agreed-upon termination. Proceeding with a new offer without resolving the prior agreement could create a situation of dual contracts or lead to claims of breach of contract by the seller. Another incorrect approach would be to advise the seller to simply return the buyer's deposit without consulting legal counsel or formally terminating the contract. This is professionally unacceptable because the disposition of a deposit is governed by the terms of the contract. Without proper contractual termination procedures, returning the deposit prematurely could be seen as a waiver of the seller's rights under the contract, potentially exposing the seller to further legal action or financial claims from the buyer. A further incorrect approach would be to pressure the buyer to waive the financing condition without understanding the buyer's actual financial situation or the specific terms of the clause. This is professionally unacceptable as it could be construed as misrepresentation or undue influence. The agent's role is to facilitate the transaction based on the agreed-upon terms, not to manipulate the parties into actions that may not be in their best interest or that violate the spirit of the contract. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making framework when faced with contractual ambiguities or potential breaches. This framework includes 1. Understanding the contract. Thoroughly review the executed agreement, paying close attention to all clauses, especially conditions precedent and their timelines. 2. Client consultation. Discuss the situation with the client, explaining the contractual obligations and potential implications of various actions. 3. Regulatory compliance. Ensure all actions align with the Real Estate Services Act, Manitoba, and its associated regulations, as well as the Real Estate Association of Manitoba, REAM Code of Ethics. 4. Legal advice. Recommend seeking legal counsel for complex interpretations or when disputes arise, as real estate agents are not qualified to provide legal advice. 5. Documentation. Maintain meticulous records of all communications, advice given, and actions taken. Question 18. The audit findings indicate that a property manager in Manitoba has been handling lease renewals for a portfolio of residential properties by verbally confirming with tenants whether they wish to continue their tenancy after the initial fixed term expires, and then allowing them to stay on a month-to-month basis without a new written agreement or a specific clause in the original lease detailing this transition. What is the most appropriate course of action for the property manager to ensure compliance with Manitoba's residential tenancy laws? Option A. Advise landlords that fixed-term leases automatically convert to month-to-month tenancies under the Residential Tenancies Act, Manitoba, and no further written documentation is required unless a rent increase is planned. Option B. Continue the current practice of verbal confirmation for month-to-month renewals, as this is a common and accepted method for informal lease extensions in Manitoba. Option C. Immediately draft and execute new written lease agreements for all affected tenancies, clearly outlining the month-to-month terms and the notice periods required for termination as per the Residential Tenancies Act, Manitoba. Option D. Inform tenants that their original fixed-term lease has expired and they are now on a month-to-month basis, and any changes to terms will be communicated verbally as needed. The correct answer is C. Immediately draft and execute new written lease agreements for all affected tenancies, clearly outlining the month-to-month terms and the notice periods required for termination as per the Residential Tenancies Act, Manitoba. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential breach of the Residential Tenancies Act, RTA, of Manitoba concerning lease agreements. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the property manager to balance the landlord's desire for flexibility with the tenant's right to a stable tenancy and clear contractual terms, all within the strictures of Manitoba's residential tenancy legislation. Misinterpreting or misapplying the RTA can lead to disputes, financial penalties, and damage to professional reputation. The best approach involves clearly defining the lease term and renewal conditions in writing, adhering to the RTA's requirements for lease agreements. This means specifying a fixed term or a month-to-month arrangement from the outset, and outlining any conditions for renewal or termination in a manner that is transparent and legally compliant. The RTA mandates that all terms and conditions of a tenancy agreement must be in writing and clearly understood by both parties. By ensuring the lease agreement explicitly states whether it is a fixed-term lease that converts to month-to-month or a direct month-to-month lease, and by detailing the notice periods required for termination as stipulated by the RTA, the property manager upholds their legal obligations and protects both the landlord and the tenant. This proactive approach prevents ambiguity and potential disputes. Failing to clearly define the lease term and renewal conditions in writing, and instead relying on verbal assurances or assumptions about automatic renewal, is a significant regulatory failure. The RTA requires written agreements for all tenancies. Verbal agreements are difficult to enforce and can lead to disputes over terms, notice periods, and rent increases, all of which are specifically addressed by the RTA. This approach exposes the landlord to potential legal challenges and the tenant to uncertainty. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a fixed-term lease automatically converts to a month-to-month tenancy without any specific clause in the agreement addressing this transition. While this is a common practice, the RTA requires that such conversions be clearly outlined in the lease agreement itself or through a subsequent written addendum. Without this clarity, the terms of the renewal, including notice periods and potential rent adjustments, can become a point of contention, violating the spirit and letter of the RTA's requirement for clear contractual terms. Finally, attempting to impose new terms or conditions upon renewal without adhering to the notice periods and requirements for rent increases as stipulated by the RTA is also a regulatory failure. The RTA provides specific guidelines for rent increases and requires proper written notice to be given to the tenant. Circumventing these provisions, even with the landlord's instruction, is a violation of the law and can result in penalties. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and strict adherence to the Residential Tenancies Act of Manitoba. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirements of the RTA regarding lease agreements, terms, and renewals. 2. Reviewing the existing lease agreement to determine its current status and compliance. 3. Consulting with legal counsel or the residential tenancies branch if there is any ambiguity. 4. Communicating clearly and in writing with both the landlord and the tenant about the terms of the tenancy and any proposed changes, ensuring all actions are documented and legally sound. Question 19. Benchmark analysis indicates that clients often express a desire for full ownership of a property in Manitoba, but may not fully grasp the distinctions between various legal frameworks. A couple is purchasing a condominium in Winnipeg and wishes to have the ability to sell their unit at any time, bequeath it to their heirs in unequal proportions, and have their individual ownership interests clearly defined. Which of the following best describes the ownership structure that aligns with their stated intentions under Manitoba's property law? Option A, fee simple ownership with title held as tenants in common. Option B, fee simple ownership with title held as joint tenants. Option C, a long-term leasehold interest with the condominium corporation. Option D, a life estate interest in the condominium. The correct answer is A, fee simple ownership with title held as tenants in common. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misinterpretation of property ownership types, which can lead to significant legal and financial consequences for clients. A real estate professional must possess a thorough understanding of the nuances between different forms of ownership to provide accurate advice and protect their clients' interests. Careful judgment is required to identify the most appropriate ownership structure based on the client's stated intentions and future plans. The best professional approach involves clearly distinguishing between fee simple ownership and leasehold interests, and then further differentiating between joint tenancy and tenancy in common when multiple owners are involved. Fee simple represents the most complete form of ownership, granting the owner the right to possess, use, and dispose of the property indefinitely. Leasehold, conversely, grants the right to occupy and use a property for a specified period under a lease agreement, with ownership remaining with the landlord. When multiple individuals are acquiring property, understanding the implications of joint tenancy, where ownership is shared equally with a right of survivorship, versus tenancy in common, where ownership shares can be unequal, and there is no automatic right of survivorship, is crucial for estate planning and avoiding future disputes. This comprehensive understanding ensures that the chosen ownership structure aligns with the client's objectives and complies with Manitoba's property law. An incorrect approach would be to conflate fee simple ownership with leasehold interests. This failure to differentiate fundamental ownership rights would lead to advising clients on the wrong type of tenure, potentially resulting in them acquiring rights they did not intend or failing to secure the rights they require. Another incorrect approach is to treat joint tenancy and tenancy in common as interchangeable. This oversight ignores the critical differences in survivorship rights and the ability to hold unequal shares, which can have profound implications for inheritance and the distribution of property upon the death of an owner, directly contravening the principles of clear property division and client intent under Manitoba law. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should begin with a detailed client consultation to ascertain their goals, financial contributions, and intentions regarding future ownership and inheritance. This should be followed by a clear explanation of the available ownership structures under Manitoba law, highlighting the rights, responsibilities, and implications of each. The professional must then guide the client towards the ownership type that best reflects their stated objectives, ensuring they understand the long-term consequences of their decision. Question 20. Governance review demonstrates that a property manager in Manitoba is evaluating two prospective tenants for a rental unit with a monthly rent of $1,800. Tenant has provided a letter from their employer stating a gross annual salary of $55,000. Tenant B has provided a letter from their employer stating a gross annual salary of $50,000 and has also submitted bank statements showing an average monthly savings deposit of $400 over the past 6 months. Both tenants have provided positive rental references. The property manager is considering a policy of requiring gross monthly income to be at least 3 times the monthly rent for all applicants. Which of the following approaches best reflects a compliant and professional tenant screening process in Manitoba? Option A. Request additional personal information from tenant B, such as details about their family size and marital status, to assess their financial needs and determine if they can afford the rent, while proceeding with tenant A based on their higher stated salary. Option B. Calculate the gross monthly income for both tenants. For tenant A, divide the annual salary by 12. For tenant B, divide the annual salary by 12 and add the average monthly savings deposit to this figure to determine their total verifiable monthly income. Then, compare this total verifiable monthly income against the 3 times rent threshold for both applicants, and if tenant B's total verifiable income meets the threshold, proceed with a credit check and reference verification for both. Option C. Reject tenant B outright because their stated gross annual salary, $50,000, is less than 3 times the monthly rent, $1,800 x 3 equals $5,400 annually or $54,000 annually. Proceed with tenant A, assuming their higher salary is sufficient. Option D. Accept tenant A based on their higher stated gross annual salary and reject tenant B because their stated gross annual salary alone does not meet the 3 times rent guideline, without further investigation into their savings or other potential income sources. The correct answer is B. Calculate the gross monthly income for both tenants. For tenant A, divide the annual salary by 12. For tenant B, divide the annual salary by 12 and add the average monthly savings deposit to this figure to determine their total verifiable monthly income. Then, compare this total verifiable monthly income against the 3 times rent threshold for both applicants, and if tenant B's total verifiable income meets the threshold, proceed with a credit check and reference verification for both. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in property management in Manitoba, balancing the need to secure reliable tenants with the legal and ethical obligation to avoid discriminatory practices. The challenge lies in interpreting and applying the Manitoba Human Rights Code and the Residential Tenancies Act when assessing potential tenants, particularly when financial information is incomplete or raises concerns. A property manager must make a decision that protects the landlord's investment while upholding the rights of all applicants. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves a systematic and objective evaluation of all applicants based on predetermined, non-discriminatory criteria. This includes verifying income through pay stubs, employment letters, or bank statements, and assessing creditworthiness using credit reports. If an applicant's stated income is insufficient to cover rent, the property manager should explore legitimate supplementary income sources or require a co-signer, provided these options are offered consistently to all applicants in similar financial situations. The key is to focus on the applicant's ability to pay rent and their history of fulfilling tenancy obligations, without making assumptions based on protected characteristics. This aligns with the principles of fair housing and the requirements of the Residential Tenancies Act, which mandates that decisions be based on objective factors related to tenancy. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately reject an applicant solely because their stated gross monthly income is less than 3 times the monthly rent, without exploring other verifiable sources of income or considering the applicant's overall financial stability and rental history. This could be discriminatory if other applicants with similar income-to-rent ratios are offered alternative solutions. Another incorrect approach is to request information about an applicant's family status or marital history to assess their financial needs or stability. This directly violates the Manitoba Human Rights Code, which prohibits discrimination based on family status and marital status. Such inquiries are irrelevant to an applicant's ability to pay rent or be a responsible tenant. A third incorrect approach is to accept an applicant based on a subjective feeling or personal acquaintance, while rejecting another applicant with a stronger financial profile and verifiable income. This lacks objectivity and can lead to accusations of bias or preferential treatment, failing to adhere to the principles of fair selection and potentially contravening the spirit of the Residential Tenancies Act. Professional reasoning. Property managers in Manitoba must develop a standardized tenant screening process that is applied consistently to all applicants. This process should focus on objective criteria such as income verification, credit history, and rental references. When financial information is borderline, it is crucial to explore all legitimate avenues for verification and to offer consistent solutions, like co-signers, to all applicants in similar circumstances. Any deviation from this standardized, objective approach risks violating human rights legislation and tenancy laws, leading to legal repercussions and damage to professional reputation.